It is rare that a plane goes missing. It's rare for a fatal air accident to occur in the first place, but a disappearance of a plane can be very much shrouded in mystery. Without a plane or its wreckage to examine and extract data from, it can be unclear how events unfolded on flights that fall into this category. We're going to look into one of those incidents today, that of a plane taking a repositioning flight that went missing in September of 1990, leading to the presumed deaths of 16 people. When we look at this incident, it is always important to remember that the wreckage of the plane has never been found. We don't know exactly what happened. What I'm about to present to you should be treated with as much caution as any form of speculation. Let's cut to the chase and let's run through a version of events of what happened. First, we need to look to the country of Peru. One of that country's largest air carriers of the time was an operator by the name of Faucett Peru Airlines. That airline in 1990 operated a mixed fleet of planes, but among them was the American trijet aircraft, the Boeing 727. One of these 727 planes, registered as Oscar Bravo 1303, was leased to another airline half a world away in Europe for the summer months of 1990. Faucett Peru leased the plane to Air Malta, who needed a larger fleet to accommodate for the summer seasonal traffic. For this time, the plane was painted in the livery of the Maltese operator. As a result, this photograph was taken of the plane in Birmingham, England, on June 25, 1990, bearing the Peruvian registration. Faucett Peru's contract with Air Malta only lasted until September, and so the plane would need to be repositioned to South America. During the plane's tenure in Malta, it was operated by a Peruvian crew who would be taking the repositioning flight home, plus some of their family members who also needed to be moved back to Peru. The date of the repositioning flight was September 11, 1990. Departing Malta that day, the 727 would make several stopovers as the plane simply did not have the range to fly directly to South America. Stopovers were made in Milan, London, although it should be noted that sources are conflicting on these first two stops. Some note that the plane flew to London while others don't, but most seem to point to Milan being the first stop. Following there, the plane was to fly to Keflavik Airport in Iceland before crossing the North Atlantic to Gander, Newfoundland, then Miami, then Lima, Peru. The disappearance occurred on the Keflavik to Gander leg. Once finishing their turnaround in Keflavik, the 727 left Iceland at 1:16 p.m. local time. At the surface level, we can ascertain that the plane flew for most of this journey but did not arrive in Gander. It was expected to arrive there at around 3 p.m. local time that day. The plane did not simply disappear after takeoff, although air traffic controllers in Gander never heard from the plane, which is presumed lost in the North Atlantic, somewhere off the southeast coast of Newfoundland, in a range upwards of 180 miles. With these details in place, let's delve deeper and pick this apart further. Shortly before the plane's disappearance, a fuel emergency was noted. We know this because as the plane was over the Atlantic, the 727's flight crew did radio out messages on the emergency frequency for other planes to pick up as a sort of SOS call. It's common for aircraft to have one radio tuned into this frequency at all times for an instance such as this. So, did anyone hear it? The answer, yes. Both an American Airlines and TWA flight heard the distress call. The Faucett plane was out of range of communication with any ground controllers in Canada. Perhaps an attempt was made for the other planes to act as a bridge of communication between the 727 and the ground. At a quick glance, you could make the assumption that fuel starvation played a role. The 727's range for the 200 model involved was just over 4,700 kilometers. The distance between Keflavik and Gander was just over 2,500 kilometers. According to multiple sources, records would indicate that the plane was fueled for roughly 6 hours of flying time, enough for the flight plus 2 hours worth of fuel, which would seem to line up with the GMT time as these messages were recorded to have gone out 5.5 hours after the plane left Keflavik. This may be conflicting with another source, which stipulates that the fuel emergency was recorded at 3:23 p.m., just 23 minutes after the plane was expected to land in Gander. Still, this was not a case of the plane simply not taking on enough fuel. They had more than enough. The reason for this disappearance lays elsewhere. Most airplanes in 1990 did not have any GPS technology equipped, so there is no archival GPS data to track where the plane went, so any data pertaining to where the plane actually flew was recorded on the aircraft's flight data recorder. The data recorder is probably more known by its colloquial name as one of the black boxes. Of course, the black box was on the plane and so lost along with the rest of it. Because the accident flight was in communication with both American Airlines and TWA planes, and given the limits of radio communication, we know the 727 disappeared somewhere over the West Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Canada. One could suggest that the plane flew off course. In 2006, a user to a popular aviation forum commonly frequented by aviation professionals posted a thread to which one of the replies came from a user claiming to be one of those who investigated the disappearance from Canadian authorities. If they are to be believed, this is one hypothesis which sounds plausible. It is stipulated that though the 727 flew for most of its journey, it was not exactly on course. In fact, one could argue it immediately started drifting south of its supposed flight plan, which was exacerbated over the entire flight. Once leaving Keflavik Airport, the flight crew was supposed to fly a track heading of 234 degrees. To understand how this could go wrong, we'll need to more closely examine the equipment the pilots probably used to navigate. Because the 727 is a 1960s era plane, there was no GPS technology as already mentioned. Instead, as they were expected to fly in a southwesterly direction after takeoff, the flight crew would have expected to pick up radio signals from the ground. In this case, the radio signals were expected to be coming from the VOR beacon in Gander. Let's have a brief recap about VORs. VOR stands for Very High Frequency Omnidirectional Range. It's a type of radio navigational aid that was certainly more common in the past. It broadcasts a radio signal which pilots of an aircraft can tune into, but the Faucett 727 failed to pick up the VOR or any radio nav aids pertaining to Gander. But let us entertain for a moment that the crew were using a different piece of technology to navigate, as there was another piece of equipment that was common for aviation navigation on commercial planes really taking off in the 1970s, the Inertial Navigation System, or INS. On the 727 and many of Boeing's planes, as well as aircraft from other manufacturers, the INS system and unit the pilots used had an interface consisting of a simple keypad. It looks very similar to a calculator. A starting input coordinate is programmed into the INS. Then once the plane is moving, its onboard gyros calculate the precise geographic position with some margin for error. Up to 10 coordinates can be punched into the system per unit. Once reaching the first waypoint, the system is programmed to fly to the next. Prior to GPS and modern avionics, this is how a lot of airliners navigated. It would be highly unusual for the INS to be this inaccurate, though without the wreckage in the INS system itself to work off of, you perhaps could argue that. However, there are possibilities of other scenarios. Perhaps the pilots punched incorrect coordinates into the system. If that is to be believed, then a major lapse in crew communication occurred, as pilots should cross-check their waypoint information with their printed flight plans before takeoff. Looking into the history of aviation disasters, you could point to another scenario also, that simply the INS system did not engage, either through a system failure or pilot mismanagement. A similar scenario is believed to have happened in the shootdown of Korean Airlines Flight 7, which occurred in 1983. Without the INS system to guide them, the 747 in that incident flew hundreds of kilometers off course, drifting north, crossing into the restricted airspace of the Soviet Union. A similar scenario could explain why the Faucett 727 also seemed to drift off course. There is, however, debate as to whether this particular plane had an INS system installed in the first place, as the accident aircraft was constructed in 1969 for the purpose of air travel largely over land. Regardless, though all of this explains why the 727 was not where it should be, it doesn't explain why they couldn't find their way to an airport. As previously mentioned, radio navigation played a large role in the operation of early Boeing aircraft. Being potentially hundreds of kilometers off the Canadian or United States coast, they wouldn't have been able to pick up any radio navigational aids relating to any airport. They were simply too far away. As a result, the plane vanished, with their last communication regarding their fuel emergency. The pilots presumably attempted to ditch the plane in the Atlantic Ocean. All 16 people on board are also presumed dead, lost in the ocean. The wreckage, as stated, was never found. However, adding to this mystery, some tarpaulins, which have been believed to have been on board the aircraft, washed up on the shores of Canada some time after the disappearance. An accident report was never released, as the 727 likely ditched somewhere in international waters. As it was registered to Peru, jurisdiction surrounding an investigation would fall to the duty of Peru. The nation of Peru, however, at the time, was not in the best of places. Hyperinflation and political chaos likely obscured this incident. Airplane disappearances are rare. Most missing planes tend to be small or general aviation aircraft. There have only ever been a handful of airliners that have vanished. For example, we already have a video on the missing flight of Pakistan International Airways Flight 404. That plane went missing in the Himalayas in 1989. Perhaps, though, the most captivating of them all is the case of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, an incident which has been discussed ad nauseum, with pockets of new information turning up year by year. Should the demand be there from the viewers, we'll make this video soon. Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching. It is that time of the week where I must thank my patrons on Patreon for their support. If you're interested in joining, you can do from £3 per month. Just follow the link in the pinned comment below. And with that, you'll get early access to all new content 48 hours before it goes out on YouTube. I have also been thinking about adding a £1 tier, but I'll let you know in a video if we end up doing that. But with all that said, a thank you to the £5 tier patrons: Adventures Are Stupid, Alice Luttress, Avery Teoda, Bar Lavon, Chillhelm, Hunter Heilman, Hector Palmateles, Jennifer Ferketic, Joey, John Ambrosia, KTP123, Kelly Randoya, Ken Zachman, Kenneth Morans, Len, Leon Sant Jennings, Lizzie Wizzy Let's Get Busy, Murray Ennis, MG, Michelle, Mom Left Me at Best Buy, MX Koi-Fish, Pac-Man 7, Panic Chicken, Pedro Cruz, Rebecca Rivers, Rez, Rio Wheatley, Surya Melody, Sleepy, and Tristan Kriegsman. And a special thanks to the very generous £10 tier patrons: Aidan Montgomery, Anne Sid, David Dabrowski, Derek Bean, Epsilon, Evgeny Chernov, Karma, Micah Seal, Mike Milton, Roger Mayer, So FP, Steve Cottrell, Thick Coconut, Trans Rights Baby, Vapronva, and Where Are My Cheetos? And that is it from me for this week. I hope you have a good weekend, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.